MSNBC is being blasted online for a bizarre comparison of Trump's Madison Square Garden rally to a pro-Nazi rally that took place at the same arena 85 years ago. The network included a written description of the Trump rally during their coverage, saying, "Trump's MSG rally comes 85 years after pro-Nazi rally at famed arena."
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place, is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners. When a Jewish protester rushed the stage, the Associated Press reported, quote, "Instantly, a dozen or more stormtroopers set upon him, knocking him down and beating him as he held his head in his arms. Most of his clothing was torn from his body. Later, he was booked for disorderly conduct." Now, against that backdrop of history, Donald Trump, the man who has threatened to use the military against opponents he calls enemies from within, who has threatened to use the troops to quell what he says are lawless cities, and to use those troops to carry out mass deportations of immigrants, is once again turning Madison Square Garden into a staging ground for extremism.
This sent social media into meltdown, with this commentator saying, "This is how MSNBC is describing Trump's MSG rally. I can't wait for them to be completely and totally irrelevant. Pure trash." This commentator simply said, MSNBC is too far gone. In addition to the strange rhetoric on MSNBC, the DNC also projected the words "Trump praised Hitler" onto the outside of Madison Square Garden during the rally. Commentators went wild, with this commentator saying, Democrats are projecting the phrase "Trump praised Hitler" on Madison Square Garden while Trump's speaking. It's daylight defamation and Trump must sue for millions. And MSNBC didn't stop at Nazi comparisons. They aired biased rhetoric throughout their broadcast, such as Trump re-ups vile rhetoric about immigrants at MSG. And also, Trump forgoes prompter to rant about conspiracies. This commentator blasted the network for allowing such biased rhetoric, saying, "A sample of cryons covering the MSG rally from the news media." This commentator agreed, saying MSNBC will be out of business soon. But MSNBC were humiliated when a voter in Michigan exposed their bias on their own network.
I've heard so much about Trump being angry and he's a fascist and a dictator, but problem is when I listen to him, I don't hear any of that.
MSNBC's dangerous rhetoric comes after Sky News host Rita Panahi slammed Kamala Harris for pushing the same dangerous and divisive ideas.
Where Kamala Harris called Donald Trump a fascist, that's after she claimed he admires Hitler. What do you make of these tactics so close to November 5?
She seems to have chosen her closing argument. In her 90-day sprint, she toyed with sort of an economic message, a couple of other things, and now she's coming back to the tried and tested, he's Hitler, he's a fascist, that whole argument. I don't think it's going to make a difference, number one, to the everyday working class people and middle class people in the electorate who don't care about that. We've seen this movie before. It's also very irresponsible. Many people have been saying that, given that the man has literally dodged 2 assassination attempts and the media swept it under the rug, and here we are.
Comedian Alex Stein agrees, saying the Hitler rhetoric is blowing up in their faces.
Which they think that what they're doing is trying to demonize Hitler. What they think they're doing, they're trying to demonize Donald Trump, but they're humanizing Hitler, who wanted to mass exterminate millions of people. Yeah. And Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. Donald Trump wants to save people. He didn't start any wars when he was president. So it's absolutely absurd how they use this rhetoric and compare him to the worst human being in world history, when Donald Trump loves America and he loves this country. And Kamala Harris, I cannot say the same for her. I don't think she loves America like Donald Trump does.
These desperate measures to besmirch the name of Donald Trump come as Kamala Harris is experiencing her most difficult period yet on the eve of the election, says Sky News Outsiders hosts Rita Panahi, Rowan Dean, and James Morrow.
But Rita, it is looking like Donald Trump will win. That is certainly where things are heading at the moment. But the key thing is that the Kamala Harris campaign really has been a disaster, however you look at it. She is just a woeful candidate. Put all politics aside, just as a performing candidate, she is hopeless, I would say.
Oh, she is thoroughly hopeless, but we have seen a media campaign unlike anything I've ever seen in my life, where we had even media that had been critical of her up until her elevation to being the Democratic candidate completely do a 180, completely memory hole everything we know about this woman, not just as vice president, but her record before that, and present her as this visionary, confident, just capable leader who was going to turn things around. And for a while it seemed to be working, and that was, I think, surprising to a lot of people. But that media campaign has continued, but you cannot hide the real Kamala from the American public. Nor can you tell them to forget what they have known and experienced.
But also, James, I would argue that the wheels are coming off that media campaign. So you've had the Washington Post, for example, who've never before not endorsed the candidate, are now saying we're not going to endorse
There's
anyone.
been two big non-endorsements here this week. Number one, the Los Angeles Times has decided not to endorse anyone for president.
Traditional Democrat.
They're traditionally Democrats. They've endorsed every Democrat since Obama. They haven't endorsed a Republican since George W. Bush. Now, there's really interesting because the news is broken that the family that owns the LA Times is upset about Kamala Harris's stance on Gaza. She's not far left enough for them.
No.
So that's really interesting. Now, but the thing that has everybody in a complete meltdown in the media, and you can watch the Democrat media melting down here, is the Washington Post, where Jeff Bezos, the owner of that, well, everyone's now canceling their subscriptions to the Washington Post because they said, we're not going to take a stance on this presidential campaign. And all the hard left columnists, all the Jen Rubins, everybody there on the editorial page with Trump derangement syndrome have completely lost their minds over this.
In Australia, too, we had Peter Fitzsimons, Jane Caro, all the lefties on Twitter going, I'm cancelling my subscription to the Washington Post. I'm sure the Washington Post are very concerned about their subscriptions to inner city Sydney.
To me, these non-endorsements, they're sort of a nothing burger, because the Washington Post, the LA Times, they have pushed this Democrat narrative relentlessly. They continue to do so. So just because they're not doing a formal endorsement,
exactly. And Rita,
really doesn't mean anything other than they're pretending they're unbiased.
I mean, go to the New York Times now. There's an article in the New York Times right now which opens up, and this is a pro-Kamala argument, saying that when she was made vice president in 2020, she's looking at her intelligence briefings, and the first thing she noticed was gendered language and ordered a review into gendered language in intelligence reports. We will have a DEI administration if she wins. It's going to be a disaster.